Hi, everyone, and welcome to my workshop on composing a hymn. My name is Scott Perkins, and I'm a composer and head of music theory and composition at California State University, Sacramento. And I'd like to start off by thanking the Sacramento Valley chapter of the American Guild of Organists and its dean, Ron Sidhu, for inviting me to be with you this morning or this afternoon if you're not on the West Coast. I've written a fair amount of sacred choral music, so today I'm going to talk to you about what my process is for composing a hymn, and then I'll write one on the spot for you, I hope, a little terrifying, and sort of tell you what I'm thinking about while I do it, and then I'll perform it for you, and then I'm happy to take as many questions as we have time for. You can just put them in the comments below this video as you have them. So composing is a little bit more than just getting an idea and writing it down. There are many thoughts regarding the stages of what we might call the compositional process, or the steps that a composer takes from the beginning to the end of writing a piece of music. And it really varies from composer to composer. How somebody writes a piece of music is a really personal decision, and the compositional process for any individual composer is often something that develops over years as an artist matures and sort of discovers things about themselves and how they work best as a composer. In fact, my process even varies from piece to piece. If I'm writing a piece for orchestra, my process will be different from what I do when I write a large choral piece, and even my process for writing something for choir varies from piece to piece. But when I'm writing a hymn, I've discovered that my process takes me through about 16 steps. And some of these steps are repeated because they need to appear at different stages of the process. And I should also say that this process is iterative, meaning that sometimes I may return to an earlier step that I've already gone through because the piece requires it. First of all, there's a pre-composition stage to writing a piece of music. Pre-composition, the idea of pre-composition, is actually a bit of a controversial idea. Some people begin that the moment you start conceiving of the piece, that's part of the composition process. And some people say that the composition process, the compositional process, begins when you start putting notes down. So anything that comes before the moment when you start putting notes down is pre-composition. But if we were to talk about pre-composition anyway, the first step would be that I ideate a concept and or receive a request. So if I'm ideating a concept, I might think, you know, for a long time, I've wanted to write a hymn about people living lives that mirror God's compassion, and it's time for me to write that hymn. And if I receive a request, a music director might come to me and say, you know, we're coming up on Music Sunday at our church in a couple of months, and I would love it if you could write us a new hymn about praising God through song that we can introduce to the composition that day. We have about $10 left in our music budget after COVID, and we're willing to spend up to 30% of it on this project. And I'm like, yes, let's go ahead. Then the next step 2, I'll conceptualize. So I have some general themes for my hymns now. One is about living compassion, and the other one is about praising God through song. So what do I want to look for in a text to express those themes? Hymns are usually strophic, meaning that they have several verses, right? So maybe I want to tell a story over the course of 4 or 5 verses. Or maybe each verse could show a different example of compassion or a different aspect of music's capacity to praise. And what's the best way to present those ideas in a hymn? Well, if it's celebratory, maybe I want to start off with a verse with everybody in unison, so there's a lot of strength there. And then maybe a couple of verses in parts, so we can hear the choir, give the choir and the congregation a chance to sing some harmony. And then maybe a verse with the altos, tenors, and basses on the tune, but the sopranos on a big sweeping descant, and a final verse with everybody in unison, but with special harmonies from the organ. If it's more reflective, a sweeping descant and unexpected harmonies might not be appropriate. Next, I'm going to research and find a text. Sometimes a music director will give me suggestions, or maybe they even have a specific text in mind that they want me to use, but sometimes they have, in fact, often I would say, in my experience, often, they just sort of have the theme in mind, which is great, because then I get to search for something that I find inspirational, and that's a really fun process. I love poetry, and I'll usually read well over 100 poems before I pick one for a hymn. And if it's a larger vocal work, then I'll often read over 1,000 poems. Um, and sometimes I think, wouldn't it be interesting to take the text of an existing hymn and compose new music for it? But it's not entirely a random process though, because there are certain hymn writers whose style or language I like more than others. Like Fanny Crosby, for example, I love most of her work. And she wrote over 8,000 hymn texts, so I might not need to go farther than her. And I also know to avoid E.A. Hoffman and John H. Stockton and people like that, because experience has just told me that I'm probably not going to like their work for the purposes of setting it to music. And then next, obtain permissions. So older texts, including, fortunately, everything by Fanny Crosby is no longer under copyright. So I don't have to ask permission to set her text to music. Those texts are said to be in the public domain. And what's in the public domain varies from country to country because each nation has its own copyright laws. But in the US, anything that was written over 95 years ago by someone who died over 50 years ago is fair game. Anything that was written over 95 years ago by somebody who died over 50 years ago is considered in the public domain. And anything that doesn't meet those requirements is still under copyright. And that means you have to track down whomever owns the rights and ask for permission. And in my experience, that can take upwards of half a year, and it can actually be very expensive too. So some composers aren't willing to go through all of that, so they use text exclusively in the public domain. In fact, I remember reading an article by Stephen Paulus. Some of you might know his work. Died a few years ago. Wonderful, wonderful, talented composer. And yeah, he wrote an article for New Music Box, I think, that it was basically ranting against the whole process of trying to obtain permissions to set texts, and he said that he doesn't bother with it. He just sets texts that are in the public domain. But I don't feel that way myself. But anyway, with all of that out of the way, the next step, you can start to plan the piece. And my final step in the pre-composition process is I find it's rarely a good idea to just rush into something with a hastily put together plan. So it's good to sit with it for a while and just let it incubate. So the composition stage. I would start off by ideating the music, and it's often difficult and maybe even bewildering to someone who doesn't compose to imagine what it's like to hear original music in their head. But I like to say that it's a little bit like the idea of visualization. Um, about 1 to 3 out of every 100 people, I think I remember, aren't able to visualize things. It's a conditional called aphantasia. But if you are able to visualize things, all right, picture right now in your mind 2 elderly friends in sun hats. Now imagine them in sun hats sitting on a picnic blanket playing checkers. Now imagine them in sun hats sitting on a picnic blanket playing checkers in the middle of the Sahara Desert. So you've probably seen all of those elements before, either in person or in photos, but you probably haven't seen all of those elements in that particular configuration before. If so, please enter that in the comments. I'd love to know about that. But you might be able to imagine it, and not just as a concept, you might even be able to visualize that whole scene in your head. And if you can do that, it means that you can see things that aren't actually there, which is a pretty amazing thing when you think about it. It's like being able to create your own daydream. And it's like that for composers too, except instead of seeing things that aren't there, we can hear things that aren't there. And we imagine music by drawing upon musical elements that we may have heard before, but that haven't been used in the configuration that we imagine. After all, the word compose actually comes from the Latin componere, which means com, with, and or together, and ponere means to put. So to compose is literally to put together or construct, and not just sort of create out of nothing. At least is the literal meaning of the word. So what results from that process of putting things together is sometimes it's pioneering or revolutionary, but the vast majority of music is composed, I would say, in response to or as an adaptation of something that someone else has already written. In fact, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm going to be completely honest. When you're writing a hymn, you don't actually want to get too inventive. You want something, for the most part, at least this is what I do. I want something that's going to be a little bit familiar sounding. because most people have pretty conservative tastes when it comes to hymns, so they won't like something that's too daring. And if you compose something that's totally weird and out there, not only aren't most people going to like it very much, but it also isn't going to be something that the congregation will be able to remember or even learn, especially the members of the congregation who don't read music. So a lot of um, writing a successful hymn is about drawing from a mental library of melodies and harmonies that I've heard in other hymns, and borrowing little bits and pieces of them and using a lot of music theory to connect everything and fill in the gaps, and then personalize everything by adapting it to my own musical language. And a musical language you can sort of think of as all of the elements of my music that make it sound like something I'd write as opposed to something that John Rutter would write, or Ray Fun Williams would write. Um, yeah, the next step in the composition process is to sketch. So this is a tough one to describe too. How do you write down music that's inside your head? And that takes a lot of skill and practice. So I'll go back again to that analogy of the two elderly friends. Um, I don't remember what they were doing. They were playing checkers in the Sahara Desert on a picnic blanket. Can you take that image and draw it? If you're like me, then the two people wearing sun hats in my drawing could easily be misinterpreted as two floor lamps or something. But if you're an artist, then you're able to observe each tiny detail of your vision with an incredible degree of specificity, and you're able to translate with each detail into lines and shapes with an incredible degree of accuracy. And what about color? When you're imagining the desert sand, you might be thinking of something tan in color, but an artist can break that sand down into pixels and show you every little nuance and shading through dozens of colors, from pink to red to yellow, brown, maybe even green. And a skilled composer can recognize each tiny detail of the music they're imagining with an incredible degree of specificity, and they're able to translate each detail into notes and rhythms and other parameters of music with an incredible degree of accuracy. That takes a lot of practice to be able to do that. And you don't have to be a composer to be able to transcribe music that's in your head. But reflect and revise. That's my next step. Reflect and revise. So composing for me is a process of constantly looking forwards and backwards. When I'm looking forwards, I'm thinking, if I were listening to this, or if I were singing this, what would I want to hear next? And when I'm looking backwards, I'm thinking, okay, but does what I want to hear next fit in with what I've just written? Does the hymn flow naturally? So it's this balancing act of thinking about what should come next, and then reflecting on what might, what I think might should how what should come next, and think, does that really fit in with what's come before it? It's always looking backwards and looking forwards. And it may not be, for example, that if I look forwards and I think this is the next thing that I want to hear, but it doesn't quite fit with the rest, that I reject it. It might be that I need to go back and change what came before it. So there's a lot of tweaking involved. Next step of the composition process, develop. And this is actually where most of the work happens. After you've sketched, you may need to flesh things out to get the right amount of density to a sound, or you may need to add or delete a few measures to reach a climax at just the right moment, or you may need to simplify some things, because why say something in 100 notes when you can accomplish the same effect in 10 notes while make it easier for the musician to sing or play. That's something that's called musical economy, which is something that a lot of composers, myself included, have valued throughout the years. And then the next step, I think, would be to complete the piece. This is where you get to the end of the last measure, but I'm using air quotes for a specific reason, because the next section and the final section of the composition process, to me, is to edit. And the first step in the editing process is, which I wouldn't even consider necessarily post-composition, it's still part of the composition project. The first step would be to reflect and revise. So there's a temptation to get to the end of the last measure and say, woohoo, I'm done. And I find that the best thing I can do, though, is to step away from a first draft for at least a week if I have the time to do it, and come back to it with fresh eyes and ears, as though I'm looking at the piece that I wrote kind of objectively. And with me anyway, chances are, because I'm not Mozart, chances are I'll find things that I want to improve upon. Um, and that's the time to revise. My next step in the editing process is to evaluate and receive evaluation. I tend not to ask for opinions about hymns much anymore because I feel pretty comfortable writing them at this point, but I'll still show them to some of my trusted church musician friends who know much, much more about hymns and congregational singing than I do. So they can weigh in and say, I don't know, I just maybe you just want to rethink this moment here for a particular reason that hadn't occurred to me. And then I already said revise and refine, but I'll say it again because that's kind of the next step. These are the final revisions that are going to polish off the piece, um, and then edit the score. So this is where I make the score look pretty enough to go in a bulletin or a hymnal or something like that, and then finish for real. Then I'm complete. So that was kind of a lot of information. Those are 16 steps. Before I give my little demonstration, maybe I'll see if anyone has questions for me about the compositional process that I've gone through so far. I'll see if there are questions already. Feel free to ask questions if you got them in the comments section here. Just wait a moment in case anybody's typing something. Going to take questions. Nothing seems to be coming through, which is fine. So now I'm back to my, wondering about lists of poets. Oh, I see, we got a couple of questions here. So Gabrielle asked, I'm wondering about lists of poets. What about lists of poets, do you mean? Like lists of poets that I particularly like? Oh man, here come the questions. Yeah, there are lists of poets whose work I like, whose work I have gravitated towards in the past, but I think I've changed my approach a little bit towards selecting texts in just the past year. I was mentioning that Stephen Paulson, I don't know. I was writing that I was saying that some composers don't like to set to music words that are not in the public domain because it is a really time-consuming process and sometimes does cost some money. But I'm kind of the opinion that no, I actually am really interested in works by contemporary authors, either people who have died recently but written things that are still very much, I would say, I don't know, that have sort of an immediate relevance to what's going on right now. And the other thing is that I'm really interested in the idea of collaboration and the process of collaboration. So if I can work with a living poet, I'd love to have that opportunity. So so in that case, it takes a lot of digging to find people who whose work kind of resonates with me. Do I usually write for multiple instruments? Yes, except not when I'm writing hymns. There are times when I've been asked to orchestrate a hymn. Like say, for example, we've got, we want a special hymn for Easter, and we've got a brass quintet or something that we've hired to play the Easter service. Can you do a special arrangement of your hymn, not just for organ or piano and choir, but maybe for a brass quintet on top of that. So when I'm writing other pieces, like concert pieces, then yeah, I write very, very few solo works. Ron asks if I can review the step numbers. Okay, so I have to check my notes here for a second. Pre-composition, ideate the concept and or receive a request. Then conceptualize. Then research and find a text. obtain permissions if I need to set that text, and then start to plan the piece, and then let it incubate. Just take a step back for a minute after you've thought about the idea for the piece and you've selected the text and you've started to see how it will unfold a little bit before you've actually written any notes down. Take a step back, let it incubate, and you may need to rethink some of your plans. After that, the composition stage. Ideate the music. Come up with those initial ideas. Sketch. So after you've come up with those ideas, put them down on paper. And then reflect and revise. So there's going to be a process of writing things down and then thinking about them and revising and tweaking, and that's where I'm looking forwards and backwards. And then develop, flesh things out to get the right amount of density, and things like that. And then complete it when you get to the end of the last measure, except that's the one that's the complete in air quotes. Then the final editing section, reflect and revise after the first draft. Then evaluate your work and receive evaluation from people you trust. Revise and refine again. Edit the score so that it looks pleasing, is formatted well, and then you're done. At least then that's when I'm done. Anyway, those are my steps. Let's see, other questions. Is a commission different than a non-commission? Asked Don Kendrick. So yes, yes it is. So with well, I should say yes and no. It depends. So with a commission, often there's going to be a specific event for which the hymn is being written. In that case, there are going to be certain parameters that I'm asked to write in, that I'm asked to follow. It wouldn't be appropriate for me to come up with, something that's meant to comfort a congregation after death or loss, if it's supposed to be to celebrate the 25th anniversary of the dedication of the organ or something like that. So there's going to be something immediately about the just the function of the music, and then that'll affect the affects or the style of the music even in a certain way. And it might also influence, somebody asked about the instruments. It might influence which instruments I should be thinking of when I write the piece. And sometimes I'm asked to use a particular text, or even beyond just a theme, to use a specific text. And so there may be certain restrictions, which can actually be helpful in some senses, because when you're not offered a commission, you're just sort of thinking, I feel like writing a hymn, which doesn't happen to me very often, but if it does, there are so many possibilities then. I mean, what kind of hymn do I want to write about? I need to set some parameters for myself. But often, if I'm going to write a hymn that's not for commission, it's because I've come across a text on my own that speaks to me in a special way, and then I can kind of do whatever I want with it. When you have two ideas that you really like but can't seem to fit together, what do you do? Kyle, you sound like a composer. Kyle has been my student in the past, yeah. So that's a tricky question to answer. I would say in the case of a hymn, because a hymn is so short and so direct in so many ways, it means you've probably got two hymns that you have to work with if you have two ideas that you really like but can't seem to fit together. You can always write multiple versions of the same hymn, multiple settings of the same same text. If you're well versed in hymnody, then you probably know a lot of different tunes. Even Away in a Manger, for example, and some of the Christmas tunes, The Little Town of Bethlehem, there are multiple tunes for those. So come up with two tunes for the same text, or maybe just, it's often very, I don't know, sort of scary to set aside music that you really, really like and really, really want to work with. But sometimes it's just, something that you kind of have to save for another time and recognize. I don't know. I save all of my sketches. I've saved all my sketches since I started composing in college. Well, I started composing before I was in college, but I've saved all my sketches. And sometimes I've come back to pieces that I never finished, and I've gotten ideas from looking over those sketches from many years ago. So there's nothing wrong with coming up with an idea that you don't use right away. And let's see. Are there copyright concerns if you write the poem yourself? No, that's a great idea. There are other concerns in my case if I write the poem myself because I'm not a poet and it would be terrible. I have written a smattering of poems. I wrote them when I was in middle school or something, and they're very dark and emo. Definitely not hymn worthy, I would say. But so those would be my concerns about using my own poetry, but no copyright concerns. If you write your own text, then you're able to use it however you'd like. Where do you start to find texts? Oh, yeah, I'll try to get to the composing in 1 minute. But where do I start to find texts as a follow-up from Gabrielle? Then yes, I actually start on the internet. I'll start off with just Google searches, for example, and say, Googling certain themes. And there are certain websites, poetry websites, that have lots of things in the public domain. Sometimes but it's a very, very long process of going down various rabbit holes, and sometimes they're dead ends, and sometimes I've discovered poets whose work I absolutely love, whom I would never have come into contact with if I hadn't been searching for something that was totally unrelated to their work, actually. So that's a really fun process. I love the process of finding texts to set to music, whether it's sacred or secular. I'm doing mostly secular music these days, but I love that process of discovering new poems that I hadn't heard before. Maybe I can address some of these other questions later on that are coming up, but I do want to start composing the piece for you like I promised. So Ron Sidhu has been collecting the texts people have been sending him via his requests in the past few AGO chapter newsletters. So I'm going to try to speed compose a hymn for you using one of your texts. And I'm going to have to skip most of the pre-composition and editing steps. So I would be able to make it better with more time, but I can take you through the composition stage. I'm going to show you my music notation program as I compose, so you can see me come up with all of the notes. And I'll talk to you as I'm doing it, let you know what I'm thinking about, and then I can sing it for you with the computer accompanying me at the end, so you can hear the finished product. So I haven't actually seen any of the text submissions yet, but because that would have been cheating. But I'm going to check my email to see whether Ron has sent me something. Yes, he has. Okay. All right. So I'm downloading it right now. I'm opening it up. All right, and it looks like he has not told me either who has submitted these texts. So I can't be biased here. All right, the texts we have, and I'm just going to set the first verse, just the first verse. So we've got one that says, "O God, whose love is ever near, whose power is over all, grant us the strength to persevere and listen to his call. The earthly flowers bring beauty to the land which God has blessed. Oh, may we sing our praises new to our eternal rest." It's actually two stanzas, but they're kind of short lines. That's the thing I think about it. Really, really beautiful text there. And in fact, I can actually put it in my Sibelius score for you just to see it as a text block. So that's text number one right there. It's a lovely text. It's just, and I don't know if I need to make this a little bigger for you. There you go. It's a lovely text. The lines are a little short, so it could end up being a little bit choppy in sound. But there are other hymns that I can think of, like "O God, our help in ages past," which is exactly the same sort of, short lines. It's a very, very, I mean, each verse ends up being very short then. But that could work really well. It's also possible to take a couple of stanzas and set them as a single verse, but we'll see. Text number two, I'll show you. Here's text number two. Let's see. I'll just move that over there. And it looks like we've got, sorry, weird things are happening. Thanks a lot, Sibelius. I'll just bring you down here. got one line that needs to be moved. Font change. All right, when we place our trust in the Lord, he will shower us with his grace, and the beauty of life will come shining through with a promise we all can embrace. When we put our trust in the Lord, he will show us the pathway to peace, and the yoke of oppression will be overthrown, and the reign of injustice will cease. Grace and peace, they are words we are longing to hear. Grace and peace, it's a blessing for all we hold dear. Another really, really beautiful text there. There's something about the length and the cadence of the first and second stanzas that sounds very natural, sort of like it rolls along a little bit. Because that's the first thing I'm probably going to consider when I'm setting this to music, is to think about a meter I'm going to use for all of this. When we place our trust in the Lord, he will shower us all with his grace, and the beauty of life will come shining through with a promise we all can embrace. When we put our trust in the Lord, he will show us the pathway to peace, and the yoke of oppression will be overthrown, and the reign of injustice will cease. Maybe I'm going a little bit too fast because I don't want people to hyperventilate while they're singing, but there's a very nice sort of 6/8 lilt to all of that. And then grace and peace, that sounds like a refrain at the end. So that would be a really nice thing to use too. Fun. Great suggestions so far. And our last one. Put that in here too. All right. I am lonesome, oh so lonesome, for that faraway southwest, where the shadows fall deepest o'er the mountain crest. I see a coyote or coyote lurking around the purple haze. I hear a lobo hollering down where the longhorns graze. And somewhere in a canyon, I hear a lion whine in those far-off Catalina mountains at the Arizona line, assuming that's supposed to be down there. Also a really, really beautiful text. Seems to me like something that I might not set as a hymn, but that would work really well as an art song, as a solo art song, or even as a short choral piece. Yeah, that's really beautiful too. A lot of beautiful imagery in that, and it's just sort of like I don't know, dripping with musical emotion in a way. I can really see how that would lend itself to musical treatment. I think the one that I'm going to do is the second one, when we place our trust in the Lord, as much as I like the other ones as well. So I'm going to keep this up here, and I'm just going to work on the first stanza for starters, and then I will see if I can put a refrain in there as well at the end. So I'll just keep this nearby so I can refer to it. And I had said that we were going to do this in 6/8, and I think based upon the rise and fall of the text and the natural text stress, I want a pickup of 2 notes right here. When we place our trust in the Lord, he will shower us all with his grace, and the beauty of life will come shining through with a promise we all can embrace. Each one of these lines seems to start off with a pickup of 2/8 notes. All right, so let me set this up then in 6/8, just fairly quickly. And actually, because 2/8 notes is a little bit awkward, I'm going to start it off with a pickup beat like this. And I'm going to need to, I'll figure out how many bars it is later on. And I'll leave space for the, all right, let me just start doing this then. Key, I have no idea. I don't have perfect pitch. I'm just going to find out something that works with the range once I've started to come up with some notes. And now I'm just going to make up a melody. And this is just something that I'm used to doing as a composer. So I'll start singing it, so I can also imagine how it would feel to sing. First thing I want to do is, Oh, this just feels like E flat to me for some reason. Yeah. So if it's going to be an E flat, I'm not going to want each phrase to end on an E flat. It would be too complete. I'll make sure that embrace is on an E flat at the very end. But as far as the earlier parts, I want each phrase to end on something other than E flat. What does an E flat sound like? Got a piano there. When we place our trust in the Lord, He will shower us all with His grace. When we place our trust in the Lord, I like the contour. When we place our trust in the Lord, when we place our trust in the Lord, He will shower us all with His grace. And the beauty of life will come shining through with a promise we all can embrace. That could work really well, except it's a big range. I went down to B flat and up to E flat. When we place our trust in the Lord, I'm going to go with that for right now. And all the stuff that I'm going to be doing right now is working within the key of E flat, hearing the notes in my head, and I'll be doing it fairly quickly and without a piano because that's something I've trained myself to do. So let me get a little number pad going here. I can enter these notes fairly quickly. All right, when we place our trust in the Lord, He will shower us all with His grace. He will shower us all with His grace. I'll go with a big range. And the beauty of life will come shining through. And the beauty of life will... What did I sing? And the beauty of life will come shining through. Beauty of life will come shining through. With a promise we all can embrace. First phrase ends on scale degree 2. Still feels pretty open. Comes to rest on a nice stable note there at the end. It's the only phrase that ends on the tonic note E flat, and so that's going to make it feel nice and complete for me. I need to put a tempo in here so that when it plays back, it'll sound... I need a, let's see, how about gracefully, since the refrain is going to be grace and peace. I'll work on the refrain once I've come up with the rest of the verse. So we've got, let's see, I'll do it like this. Dotted quarter note equals, slow it down a little bit. My cat is purring next to me. She's my composing assistant. She's also digging her claws into my leg. How about 52? Okay, I'm not hearing any sound. Are you hearing any sound? I'm gonna check in with you guys. Oh, video just disappeared, no sound. Ah, interesting. Well, that's not going to be helpful. That's never happened in a situation like this before. So when I start playing it, the video disappears. That will be a problem. Okay, all right. No worries, there's a way I can work around that too. It's just going to probably be a surprise when you hear it at the end. But I will be able to make that work too. Got to be adaptable here. Interesting. Check one thing down here. Got the stream set up. Yeah. No, I understand that. I want to make sure that you can hear the score when the computer is playing it, because I'm going to want to sing with it. But if you can't, oh, I might. Got it. Okay. Oh, I know what the problem is. I know exactly what the problem is. The video is fine, just no vocal sound. No worries. We can do this. All right. So first thing I'm going to do actually is I'm going to make it so that the accompaniment plays the melody at the same time to double the voice line. That'll make the singers feel more confident. And next thing I'm going to want to do is just really quickly enter in the text right here. So I'll have to do it in a special way. When we place our trust in the Lord, He will shower us all with His grace, and the beauty of life will come through with, oops, comma, with this will look better in a moment. Believe me. So there we go. Still looks pretty bad. This will be better. What I can do about this? Put this up at the top. I'm not sure why that's going to a separate page, but I can fix that. There we go. All right, great. So now you should be able to hear the melody. If I had a little more time, I'd probably spend a bit more time on that melody because it is going to be a tricky thing to sing, I think, to cover that much range. But I'm going to keep going for now. I'm going to confess something. While I was working on this, I was also thinking about harmonies that would work well with this melody. It's a process of having to think about multiple things at the same time. It's one thing to come up with a nicely crafted melody. It's another thing to come up with a nicely crafted melody that's actually going to work with a good harmonic progression. So as I'm hearing the melody in my head and as I was singing it out loud, I was also imagining harmonies that would go well with it. And so first thing I'm going to do is compose a bass line against this. Actually, we'll do this. Okay, and I've got to watch out for some counterpoint issues along the way too. I'm going to be thinking about a lot of music theory as I'm writing this. I have to think about the range of the organ. If this is going to be performed on the organ, I can't go below a low C right there. Proofreading on my own right now, listening to this in my head. All right, so this should sound, on the one hand, fairly familiar. On the other hand, not quite the same. So all of the elements you may have heard before, but let me just change the size of this a little bit too so I can fit more on the page. All right, let's listen to it with just the bass line and the melody right now. Get rid of this. All of that's just going to be harmonization skills that you'd learn in music theory. Let's see. So, all right. Were you able to hear that? Just want to make sure that you can hear the bass and the melody fairly clearly. Recognizing that I'm getting comments on a delay. I'll check the comments again in a minute because I haven't seen anything come through yet, although I'm sure people are responding. Okay, great. Now I'm seeing it. Yes, great. Okay, so the next thing I need to do is, first of all, I have some complaints about the way this is working out at the moment, but it's not going to be the end of the world because I have other parts that I can put in between. I'm going to be writing this in 4 parts. So I'm going to have a bass line, I'm going to have a melody, and I'm going to have 2 parts in between that will help me complete chords, because right now it sounds a little bit open and empty and kind of thin. Most hymns are going to have 4 parts going on at the same time. And something else I need to consider is, yeah, so when I have moments like this in measure 4, this sounds really problematic to me. Nothing of interest going on in measure 4 right now. I'm going to have some motion going on in here and some interest to make this sound satisfactory. And I'll do that all with the inner voices. When I'm writing inner voices, I'm thinking about 2 things at the same time. At least 2 things. Number 1, I'm going to be thinking about notes that will complete chords. Actually, I'm thinking about a lot of things at the same time. I'm going to be thinking about notes that complete chords as I'm thinking about the harmonies that I've chosen. I'm also going to be thinking about creating, well, this wouldn't be sung in here necessarily, but if I were writing this as, I'm writing this as just a single melody for the choir and congregation with accompaniment. If I were writing this in 4 parts, then for a choir to sing in 4 parts, for example, then I would be thinking really, really carefully about making sure that each of the lines, the soprano line, the alto line, the tenor line, and the bass line, had an interesting profile to it and an interesting contour, so that, you know, because I know that there are a lot of hymns, those of you who have sung hymns before and you have the misfortune of being an alto, not the misfortune, I love altos, but when from the perspective of hymn singing, often you find that the alto note just stays the same forever and ever and ever, and I don't like to do that. I know from my experience as a singer that that's really not very satisfying. So I'm going to now fill in some inner voices here and make this sound a little bit more complete. Let me put all of that in the bass voice. And I'll just see how quickly I can go through this. Oops. Right. I'm going to have to do something interesting there. I'm going to save that for a moment, but I'll let you hear a little bit of this as I start to fill it in just by completing chords. Mm-hmm. I'm making this very traditional sounding. It'll sound a little bit like me, but only a little bit. I've already got that note there. All right, so I got a tenor voice here. It's fairly low actually because of the key, but um, I mean, and because the melody is so low there, this tenor voice is moving around a little bit. Slow there. This tenor voice is moving around a little bit, and that's going to create some interest in this part where otherwise there's a whole lot of stasis. Let me see if I screwed up at all or if the harmonies make sense. Etc. This line I like very much, but I'm not so sure what I think about this little clash right there. It doesn't feel quite balanced to me. I'm going to keep it for now. I'll keep it for now. That might be something that I'd edit a little bit later on. Let me keep going with this a little bit. So I basically come through half of the tune right now, half of the verse. Oh, I could have also sung that. I'll sing it at the end, I guess. And oops, no. So yeah, that can work. I'm going to assume that this is going to be taken by the right hand, or that if it's on the organ, that this will be a pedal part there. Why am I using this particular thing right here? Because it's going to reference these notes that I used right here. Listen to this. That tenor part. So that'll make it feel like there's some sort of reference back to an earlier part of the piece. This is called a motive when you have a little gesture like that. And that can make the piece feel a little bit more unified and in certain ways. So let's see. Oop, fell off this there. Oh, this will sound nice. So I have an opportunity here to harmonize this in thirds. And then I'm not going to do it when I get to here because the bass takes over harmonizing in thirds. Why not keep that idea going then? If I'm harmonizing in thirds here, and then the bass takes over, nobody's harmonizing in thirds with the melody right there. How about the tenors? Now I don't like the tenor line so much. I don't like the tenor line so much because it's jumping around a little bit too much. It's not so bad, I think. But what I can do is, since I like this line, and I like that motive, so I'm just going to take it up here and throw it in the alto. Take it up an octave. In fact, actually, instead of going up to an E flat there, I'll go to another chord tone and make sure that I end on a G there. Just take that out for a second. All right, and let me just finish it off. Yeah, there we go. All right, here's my tune so far. Sacramento State students who are taking counterpoint classes and you're using Sibelius, there's a great plugin just to check. I'm doing this really quickly on the spot, but if you go to the review portion up here at the top, plugins, check for parallel fifths and octaves. I'm just going to do it. I didn't write any. Okay, that's good. Whew. That's just a performance practice thing that goes along with the style in which I'm writing. So that means I feel comfortable with alto one note. Oh, I saw what Jana wrote. Yeah, about alto one notes. I'm hoping that the alto part is, I mean, it's sort of sticking around in the same place right here at the beginning, but it has an opportunity to go down to, ooh, a low F right there. That's fine. If this were being sung, and it doesn't necessarily have to be, but that would be a part for altos to show off their chest voices. And then they have an opportunity for some motion right here as well, which is always fun. Um, something. Yeah, I would rewrite this if I had more time, but I'm not going to do that. I want to make sure I get to the chorus as well. Grace and peace, they are words we are longing to hear. I'll just make up a tune here. Grace and peace, grace and peace. I wonder if I can borrow any of the melodies, any of the melody that I've already written so far. Grace and peace, peace. Ooh, I can't sing the right words. One problem with my melody is that I've already reached a high note at this point, so I can't really. It will lose its effect if I put it in the refrain afterwards. First of all, with the rhythm, grace and peace, they are words we are longing to hear. Ooh, they are words we are longing to hear. That's a melody segment that I already had. I'm going to go for grace and peace, grace and peace. This is a little segment that's repeated up a step, so that'll make it feel like it's got a little bit more energy. Peace. And then what did I do? They are words we are longing to hear. Grace and peace, they are words we are longing to hear. Oops. They are words we are longing to hear. Ugh. Sure, we'll keep going with it. No, I'm not going to do that. Grace and peace, grace and peace. I don't want to start off grace and peace, which is kind of a requirement of the line right here if it's jumping up a seventh from a low note way up to there. So I'm going to do grace and peace, grace and peace. They are words we are longing to hear. Grace and peace, they are words we are longing to hear. I don't like that either. Grace and peace, words we are, too repetitive. Grace and peace, they are words we are longing to hear. That's better. Now we're moving the line up from A flat to B flat to C. And maybe when I get to the very final line, I can go even higher. Grace and peace, grace and peace. Grace and peace, grace and peace. It's a blessing for all we hold dear. That sounds like the end of the verse as well, so that brings it together. Let me enter the text right here. Grace and peace, grace and peace. They are words we are longing to punctuation there, comma. Grace and peace, grace and peace. Something, that's the text. Where did you go, text? There you are. Oh, actually I want grace and peace. It's a blessing for all we hold dear. Okay, great. Now I'm going to take this and make it the melody again. I'll get rid of the lyrics because we don't need the pianist or the organist to play the lyrics. And already you can see what I've done. Actually, I'm going to take this out for a second. This is what I had before at the end of the verse. Okay, I'm definitely going to have to put something in here to bridge the verse with the refrain, else it's going to sound really abrupt and ugly. Oops. Pedal fifth. This is awful. Sorry, just a second. Oh. Okay. So I had here, peace, it's a blessing for all we hold dear. That's what I already had here. Through with our promise we all can embrace. This is not cheating. Copy, paste, there. And I have my harmonization for there we go. And notice what I've done right here. Bum, 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 bum. That's exactly what happened right here. All right. So things I need to do now. Let's listen to this chorus. Oh. Sorry, I just heard my pedal fits across the bar line right there. Apologies, students. Wait, seriously? Oh, okay, sorry. I gotta wrap this up soon. So let me do a couple of things. I'm gonna fill in some chords. And let's put in some inner voices here. Oops. Nope, definitely not. Not very good doubling, but the best counterpoint I can come up with at the moment. That's awful, isn't it? So let me make this into a better line. Still got parallel fifths there. Still got parallel fifths there. I'm running into all sorts of counterpoint errors right now. I need a third in this chord. I know what I'm going to do. I'll put in thirds there. That was nice before. It's parallel fifths. Sorry for the pause, everybody. That's the same material, isn't it? Oh, I have a feeling there are counterpoint errors in this. Oh, I need to fix this as well. I'll do my quick trick of searching for parallel fifths and octaves with my little plugin here. I bet there is something. I'm being sloppy. 3. Oh gosh, Scott. Oh, hidden fifths. Oh, I don't care about that. Ah, there we go. All right, other ones. Oh, that's not a real one. My cat wants to join. Apparently, I still did something across the bar line here. Oh, there it is. Yeah. That's kind of gnarly counterpoint a little bit, but I kind of like it. Well, that's okay. All right, so let's listen to this. All right, I'm going to wrap this up for you really quickly here. 2 things I need to do. First of all, this sounds like the piece just dies right there. Okay, I got to do something in there, a little bit of motion. Escape tone thingy in there. Ah, this is what I'll do. We'll see. That works for me. And finally, I just need to bridge these two things so that the end of the verse goes right into the refrain. It's comical. So first of all, let's bridge this with the bass right there. I already have this gesture, bum, 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 bum. Now I'll put it in the bass as well. And a little decorated suspension. And don't want to change the melody. And the alto, sorry, altos. Not very interesting for the altos, but it's something at least. Now listen to my transition. That looks ridiculous. Okay. I think if I had more time, I would put more motion in these inner voices right now. Although the idea of grace and peace does make it feel to me like it wants to slow down a little bit and breathe. So maybe I don't want so much activity in there. I tend to be a little bit too busy as a composer, I would say. So here's our piece from start to finish. And I'll sing along. Did I get rid of all of these things? I'll just finish these off like that and space things out a little bit and actually make this look a little better. Let's move that over a bit. And I'm going to do something else really quickly for appearance sake so you can read it a little bit better. Interesting. Oh, there we go. Okay, so let me zoom out just a little bit and I'll sing along. You guys can sing along too if you want. Why not? And it's there's no introduction for this, but of course you would assume that the organist or the pianist would play a little introduction, probably the refrain. So when we place, that's how it's going to start. When we place our trust in the Lord, He will show us all His ways. And the beauty of life will come shining through with our promise we all can embrace. Grace and peace, grace and peace, they are words we are longing to hear. Grace and peace, it's a blessing for all we hold dear. Here's your hymn. That is all. Musical economy again. So musical economy is basically the idea of getting as much mileage out of as little material as possible. So it may be, for example, all right, let's suppose that you want to express an E-flat major chord like I had before. And you want it to be a pretty full sound. There is a way that you could use all of the notes, let's say between this note and this note, to fill in with all of the notes in E-flat major between them. Do you really need all of those notes in the E-flat major chord from this E-flat to this E-flat, all the notes in between? Or can you accomplish the same thing by just carefully voicing things? I'm going to include only 4 notes this time. This time I'm using 7 notes. This time I'm using 4 notes. Does the effect really change? I'm not so sure. I'm not sure that necessarily you lose much by taking out those extra 3 notes. Why write 7 notes for a chord when you could write just 4 notes and still accomplish the same thing and make it easier on the player so that they're not using so many of their fingers. The same thing can go for how much you could define musical economy also a little bit in the fact that I recycled some material from the verse in the refrain. Rather than composing new material the whole way through, I was a little bit more economical about it, and I saved some. I in the process of being economical with my material and getting more mileage out of just a few notes or a few measures or something like that, I was able to connect the refrain to the verse in such a way that it didn't feel like when you started the refrain it was a new piece or something like that. So musical economy can also be a way not just of simplifying the material without losing an effect, but also of tying disparate parts of a piece together to make them feel unified one way or another. Jim McCormick asks, do you usually compose outer voices first and then fill it in? In the case of a hymn, yes. In the case of other pieces, not necessarily. If I'm writing, for example, that's just because the very nature of this music is such that the congregation is just going to be singing the top part. The bass is going to largely establish the harmony, but there's something about the bass line that stands out so much, just like the melody part, because they're the outer extremes. And the inner parts you can sort of get away with is using them. You can tell that I sort of sometimes use them as filler material to complete chords. They have less of a prominent role in that respect, and so I often save them for last. Make sure that the bass line and the melody line are just as interesting as I want them to be, so that I'm not feeling restrained like I was in some cases with the inner voices, where it was like, I don't want to change the melody here, I don't want to change the bass part here, but I'm running into some problems with the way all of the counterpoint is working out, the way the lines are interacting with each other, and so instead I'd be more willing to change the inner parts than I would to change the outer parts, and it's easier to do that if you've established the outer parts first exactly the way you want them, and then you can sort of mess around with the inner voices. Now, if I'm writing a piece for, let's say, I don't know, a woodwind quintet, where I am trying to feature 5 different instruments pretty much equally, then it's going to be very, very important to me. And this would be the case, by the way, when I'm writing for choir, 4-part choir as well. I'd probably be thinking about each part. It may be, for example, that I want the oboe part or the alto part to stick out at a particular moment, take over. And in that case, I really need to be thinking about all of the parts at the same time, and I need to be thinking about none of the parts as fillers. None of the parts are fillers. They're all going to be, it's like they all have equal roles in a play. They all have specific characters, and I want each of those characters to have a life, and I want it to have a voice, and I want it to have a specific purpose. And that purpose is generally, for me, not going to be somebody who sits in the back and supports all of the other characters. It's generally that they have a conversation as equals. So in that case, there is no filling in of any part. It's more like I'm trying to keep track of 5 different parts at the same time and make sure that they all have an interesting character. That depends upon what you think of the rules of counterpoint as being. So the rules of counterpoint change depending upon what kind of style you're talking about. So if I were trying to write in the style, for example, of Bach, I would use certain rules of counterpoint. But if I were trying to write in the style of John Rutter, to use a church musician a lot of people know of, or Eric Whitacre, or some other well-known contemporary composers, well, it's not that those composers don't use counterpoint, but their music certainly doesn't sound like Bach, and it doesn't follow the same practices or the same procedures. So if you want to sound like, basically rules mean only as much as these are the practices that a particular composer or group of composers use. And so if you want to sound like them, these are some guidelines you should follow, because if you don't follow them, chances are you aren't going to sound like them. So if I wanted to write like Bach, I would have to follow his rules of counterpoint. And if I wanted to write like Eric Whitacre, I would have to follow Eric Whitacre's rules of counterpoint. It just so happens that there's the common practice period that we often hear of in music, in classical music, which is that there were certain underpinnings, certain structures that underpinned music from around the beginning of the 17th century through the very beginning of the 20th century. Now, it's not to say that all music sounded the same. Of course, Mahler sounds very different from Vivaldi, but there are certain contrapuntal procedures, certain rules of counterpoint that seem to underpin uh, their their music and functioned more or less the same way, but with variations on those ideas. And that's where the idea of common practice comes from. It's the common practice of certain rules of harmony and counterpoint. So if I'm writing a hymn and I want it to kind of sound like a 19th century harmony, like this one did, with a few exceptions, then yeah, I'm going to follow those rules of counterpoint. And I think most people try to do that. There are certain hymnals that tend to reflect those harmonic and contrapuntal practices better than others. Um, a lot of people complain about the counterpoint in certain hymnals, and I think it's not so much that anybody's breaking contrapuntal rules. It's just that it seems like the hymns are trying to sound like a particular style, and yet um, they don't sound as close to other representatives of that style um, as they could, because the counterpoint uh, practices in the hymn writing, in the hymn arrangements, don't line up with the counterpoint practices of composers from the 19th century. And then in the 20th century, composers broke all the rules. You could also say the same thing of Renaissance composers who broke all the rules of medieval composers, for example. There's always been this process of rules evolving and changing, and rules anyway. Most often music theory follows practice. So music theory, when we talk about rules in music theory, what we're really talking about is summaries, generalizations about the way, the structures that happen or the procedures that happen in the music of certain composers or certain groups of composers. There have been times throughout history when composers have written the rules first and then followed them, where they come up with a particular set of guidelines for their own music, and then the music that they write reflects those guidelines. But that's been the exception to the rule. The general rule has been that theorists come after the composers if they're actually different people. And to sort of, it's to a lot of students, I think they can feel like rules, but what they really are they're generalizations about the way music functions in a certain way. So the idea is, if you are trying to express um, your knowledge, if you're trying to prove your knowledge of a particular style, then the probably the best way to show that is to be able to imitate it by composing in that style. And if you're going to do that, then you have to know all of the procedures that are at work in the music you're trying to imitate. And that's where things feel like rules that can't be broken. And by the way, there are always exceptions to those rules, even before the 20th century. Bach did write some parallel fifths. Any other questions before I sign off? I just got all academic there. Okay, Denise Cartwright asks, oh, I see. Oh, okay. I'll answer Denise's question first and then go to Jana's. So Denise says, could you take something like a Gregorian chant line and write a hymn using that theme? Absolutely. Yeah. And there are a couple of different ways you could do it. You could make it isometric. In other words, where each of the notes in the Gregorian chant line were exactly the same. Or, for the most part, it's da 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 da. Where it feels like a Gregorian chant because all of the notes are about the same value. But you also hear, like, for example, Gregorian chant tunes that have been rhythmicized. And an example in hymnody, for example, is you'll find sometimes multiple settings of the same the same tune, one that sounds like traditional Gregorian chant and one that's been rhythmicized. Like, for example, in some hymnals, there's a hymn called "Of the Father's Love Begotten," and sometimes you'll see it in a couple of different settings, and one will be "Of the Father's love begotten, ere the worlds began to be," like that, or you'll hear it "Of the Father's love begotten, ere the world began to be." And that can be harmonized and turned into "Or Mighty Fortress is Our God." Yeah, exactly. There are a whole bunch of them that take Gregorian-like tunes or Gregorian chants themselves and set them as hymns. So yeah, Jana, for the hymn I wrote today, would I have changed the word "it's" to the word "is"? Did I make a mistake in doing that, or? Oh, I see. Um, I think it was supposed to be "it's," right? So, so that's a. I might be tempted to, if "it's" sounds a little bit on the nose, a little bit tacky, something like that. I don't know. You might be able to view it that way. You could also just view it as, when you say "it's," that it makes it a little bit more colloquial. Uh, but what I would definitely not do, it's just a personal practice, is I don't like to alter anybody else's text. Yeah, I mean, so you could question the word choice for sure, but as a composer, unless it's my own text that I'm using, I feel a really strong obligation to keep the text exactly as it's written. Um, Even things for example, like there are a lot of old hymn texts that use um, overtly masculine language, like referring to God as he all the time, or him, which is, I think, pretty out of vogue in a lot of circles, and I think rightly so. But at any rate, um, I am very reluctant to change the original author's words. What I would rather do is just avoid that text and find something else, because there's a lot of great stuff that's written out there. Um, so I might doubt the word. Even I would even go so far as a composer to say that I'm uncomfortable often, although I do it sometimes, repeating text. Taking a line, for example, and using it more than once in succession, which of course means that I could never write Baroque music, uh, where you have two lines that take up a 5-minute chorus or something like that, repeated over and over again. I have less of a problem with doing that, but to me, it's like, I don't know. It's kind of as it presents the same ethical dilemma as if I were conducting a piece or performing a piece and thought, I really don't like that A flat in measure 74. I think I'm going to change it to a C. I just don't touch other composers' notes. I don't touch other authors' words in that way. Well, I don't want this to drag on forever. I know there are a few of you left. If you have other questions, you're welcome to email me. I'll put my email address in the chat. Sac State students know how to reach me at my school address, but I'll put my professional email address, scott@scott-perkins.com. You're welcome to ask me more questions, and I'd love to hear from you. And thank you so much for joining me today. And thanks again to the Sacramento Valley chapter of the American Guild of Organists and Dean Ron Sidhu. And also, if you happen to be a church musician or somebody who's interested in hymnology, or somebody who's interested in organ music or choral music or anything like that, please consider joining your local chapter of the American Guild of Organists. It's a great organization that provides a lot of resources and brings in very interesting guests and hosts recitals and things like that, workshops and so forth. So I highly encourage you to get involved in that excellent organization if you're so inclined. So thank you again, and I'll catch you later.